STR podcasts are brought to you through the generous support of people just like you. You can support these podcasts by making a gift online at str.org or by phone at 1-800-2-REASON.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Greg Koukl here on Stand to Reason, and I am so thrilled that you've tuned in for today's show because we have a special treat. We are not taking calls for the first hour. If you'd like to call in the first hour, you're welcome to do that. We'll just keep you in the queue for hour number 2, and then I'll deal with your calls, answer your questions. We'll have conversation together. Right now, I'm devoting the first hour to a guest, and I think now, we've been here in the studio since May, 6 months or so, 7 months, and in the Stand to Reason studio, it's a very small studio, which means I'm very cozy with my guest right now. Dr. William Lane Craig. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Greg. Good to be here.
You hear people say this next guest is someone who needs no introduction, and then they go on and give a long introduction. And you're in the category of people, for most of my listeners, who needs no introduction. But I will say, for those who may not be familiar with Dr. Craig's work, Dr. Craig is a philosopher who has been one of my teachers and has had a tremendous influence on my own life. He's probably best known for, or I should say the book he's best known for is Reasonable Faith, Christian Truth and Apologetics. Its second edition came out about 2 years ago, Bill, or maybe 3 years ago.
A little more than that, and it was actually the third edition because
really?
The first edition had a different title.
Oh, okay. Well, if you want a single volume that deals with the basic issues that Christian apologists deal with, but really at the most sophisticated level, even though readable, still at the most sophisticated level, this is the book that I recommend. And Bill, you've, of course, done lots of other work, and you are probably best known, I think, to our listeners because you are so you debate so frequently with the other side, with atheists around the world. And am I mistaken? Do you sometimes debate in another language?
I have done German, yes. I did my doctoral work in Germany, and so I have done a couple of debates in German.
Yeah. How many debates have you done so far?
I've lost
count.
Any sense? I do not know because I just wasn't counting. I've been doing it since 1982. That was my first debate with Kai Nielsen at the University of Calgary.
Gracious, really?
Yes, and so I really don't have any record of it anymore.
Well, it seems to me that just as I've followed your career over the last, I'd say about 20 years since I've had any visibility of it, you've debated just about every notable from the other side, except for
Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins.
I thought you were thinking of him.
Yes, right. And of course, this is the famous empty chair debate. Why don't you tell us about that non-debate?
Well, I had in 2011 a British university speaking tour, and 4 British groups contacted Richard Dawkins about having a debate with me while I was over there in Oxford, his hometown.
Right.
And he had, of course, boasted that he would debate anyone at any time and he would win. But he resolutely refused to participate in this debate with me, and this got into the Guardian newspaper, and other atheists were condemning him for not doing this and the excuses that he made, and it just created the greatest publicity for the tour that you could imagine. And I wound up then speaking in the Sheldonian Theater at Oxford, and we had an empty chair for Richard Dawkins should he show up at the last minute.
Wasn't this the one where you had where your sponsoring group had billboards on the buses?
Yes.
Where is Richard Dawkins or something?
Well, what it was it said, "There's probably no Dawkins.
Now
stop worrying and enjoy October 25th at the Sheldonian Theater."
That's the takeoff on the atheists' billboards. There probably is no God, so stop worrying and enjoy life kind of thing.
Very clever.
Well, I remember listening to reading some of his responses because this is very, very public, this whole issue, and he was working so hard to avoid having to deal, the way I would look at it, having to deal with you and debate you. And And then his rationale was, at least one of them was, it was something akin to, well, who is this William Lane Craig character? I don't want to give him any unjustified credibility by sharing the stage with him. And when I think of the august academics that you've shared the stage with in a debate situation who've been happy to do so, it struck me as so odd that Richard Dawkins, of all people, would make this comment.
It was, I think, phony. And even Private Eye magazine, Greg, carried a story on his contradictory and inconsistent excuses leading up to this debate. It was very funny.
Now, that was as I recall, that tour there, you worked like crazy all over the country. You were Oxford and Cambridge, and you had debates and talks, and even one debate where people had to vote by going through the proper door.
Yes, that was at Cambridge University in the Cambridge Debating Society, the oldest debating society in the world. It was the experience of a lifetime to do that debate in Cambridge against Andrew Copson and Arif Ahmed.
I think Peter Williams was with you.
Peter
J or Peter S?
Peter S. Williams was my debate colleague in that debate, and it was British parliamentary style.
Right.
So the audience got to participate. They could stand up and interrupt you and say, point of order, and then ask a question. So it was very different from what I was used to. Yeah. And that added to the drama and the charm of the whole evening.
Yeah. Well, you are such a good sport in those things. And as I recall, you closed on a very clever note that actually kind of tipped the vote in your favor in a very clever fashion. Do you recall that?
Oh, yes, very much so, because that was very deliberate. We had a very hostile audience that night, Greg, and you could just feel the momentum turning against us. And I thought, I've got to turn this ship somehow. And so what I pointed out to the students...
What was the topic first?
Well, the resolution was belief in God is rational. I think something like that. And this House believes that belief in God is rational. That's the way it was stated. And we were defending it. And so what I explained to the students was, if they vote against this, they're saying that all of their friends who are Christians, their professors who are Christians or theists, are all irrational. And it's not a debate about does God exist or not, about whether these are reasonable people, whether it's reasonable to believe that God exists. And I said, are you so cocksure of yourself, so arrogant, that you think that everybody who disagrees with you is irrational? If you believe that, then go vote no on the resolution. But if you're open-minded and you think that rational people can disagree on this difficult and important subject, then you need to vote aye.
So you are basically playing the tolerance, their tolerance card against them in a very creative way.
Yes.
Right. And let's be nice to the people you disagree with, because
which is true.
Yeah,
it wasn't disingenuous.
No, of course, it was a very good point, because the fact is, very reasonable, rational people can be theists, and for reasonable, rational reasons. In fact, I just made the observation once, Copleston's wonderful history of philosophy, that like 12-volume set or whatever. I got to thinking about the individuals that are cited there, from the ancients all the way to the present.
Yes.
And from the time of Christ until like the 17th or 18th century, it seemed like just about every significant thinker in the history of Western philosophy was a biblical theist, for goodness sake.
Yeah, we stand in a tremendous tradition, Greg, of people not only like Augustine and Anselm and Aquinas, but Descartes, Leibniz, John Locke. We have a tremendous heritage of theists who have been the greatest philosophers of Western world history.
Now, of course, this doesn't make our view correct simply in virtue of the head count, as you know, but it just does make it a little bit ludicrous then for people to just declare out of hand that someone is irrational in virtue of his belief in God.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this is what what you were playing on there in that. What was the outcome of the debate?
The outcome was that we won by something like 13 votes. It was very close.
And how big was the House?
I think around 900 or so.
Oh, my goodness.
And a lot of people voted not by walking through the door aye or nay, but through the center door, which was basically undecided.
Yes, but that's a victory.
Well, that was a victory. That's right. If they go through that middle door, that was a victory too.
Yeah.
So it was so charming, again, the way the vote was announced. We were upstairs in the student bar waiting for the tally, and then in walks the secretary of the debate society with a brass bell, clanging the bell, saying, "Hear ye, the vote is," and then she announced the vote. The
goodness.
House carries the motion, and it was just so
pandemonium resulted.
Oh.
What a great dramatic moment
it was.
And you deserve that. My wife and I were in the Cotswolds.
That's beautiful.
That's right, in the Oxford area in general. It's a fabulous area of England, particularly if you want to just relax and enjoy the English countryside. And we were in a little town named Chipping Campden.
I know that town,
you know
yes. Yes, lovely.
Yeah, and we were having dinner at this small place, and there was an elderly couple that sitting kind of in the table next to us. And, the European style, it seems like it's easy to get in conversations with people.
Yes.
Sometimes they even sit at your own table,
yes, right.
that kind of thing. And I don't know how it is that we made the transition in these spiritual conversations, but it turns out that this man was an atheist, and he was deeply committed as an atheist, but he had been reading Lawrence Krauss's book, Something from Nothing.
Oh.
And I think it was right. It wasn't last year. It was the year before last. So it was maybe soon after you had actually debated Lawrence Krauss. And he asked if I'd read the book. I said, no, I didn't, but I have a colleague who debated him. And I understand some of the concepts because of Stephen Hawking's book that trades on some of the same concepts, the grand design. And so we were able to have a bit of a conversation. But you just had a series of debates with Lawrence Krauss, the physicist, I guess, or is he a mathematician?
Physicist, yes. He's
physicist. Sometimes that distinction is not really that relevant because they trade in both
yes. I mean,
right?
I sometimes will refer to them as mathematical physicists because they're theoreticians as opposed to practicing experimentalists.
Right. So Stephen Hawking would be in that category as well. But this was one of those, I guess, series of debates. I had 3 debates.
They were actually supposed to be dialogues, Greg. They were supposed to be conversational, friendly interaction like you and I are having now, and not really a debate.
Mm-hmm. Where you took an opposing side and had formal presentations. So there was some presentation involved.
Yes, that's right, opening statements.
It was meant to be a conversational atmosphere. Can you, without kind of giving us a blow-by-blow, some are familiar with what took place because you have quite a presence as a result on the Internet. Have had even before that, but this has been discussed quite a bit. And for those who go to your website, reasonablefaith.org, there's a lot of detail there. But this was a very difficult series of discussions, shall we say, for you. Can you give us a thumbnail sketch of what happened and why it was difficult and what the upshot was?
Well, to my surprise, it caught me completely off guard. He opened his statement by launching into the most vitriolic, vicious personal attack upon me that I have ever experienced in my ministry. He called me a liar and a thief and accused me of being basically a charlatan. And so it was extremely difficult emotionally to sit there and hear yourself dragged through the mud in this way in front of a couple of thousand people. It was very hard.
Oh, well, I mean, to think, and I didn't give all your bona fides here, but you hold 2 PhDs actually, and one of them from a European university. Is that right?
2 European universities. Yeah.
So, I mean, this ought to carry a lot of credibility for listeners. Not only that, you have a vita that's volumes, I'm sure, in terms of all of the contributions you've made to peer-reviewed philosophical journals and the like. And in addition to that, the books that you've written, sometimes co-written with people on the other side that are principals in their field. Who's the one
Quentin Smith?
Yes, Quentin Smith, for example, with whom you have great relations.
Yes.
So it's such an attack is so far from the actual truth of the matter. One wonders, what is the point of him going way out on a limb like this in an academic environment to spread shame on himself in this kind of manner?
Yeah, I do not know the answer to that question, Greg. All I can say is that I am aware from what people tell me that in the atheistic subculture, the internet subculture, that there is an enormous amount of hatred and insult that's heaped upon me, and personal character attacks upon me. I think when you can't answer someone's arguments, then you attack his character. And I am largely blissfully unaware of these because I don't read those kinds of things. But in this dialogue with Krauss, I was confronted with it full face, and it was shocking to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind it if people think I'm stupid and my arguments are lousy, but when they attack your moral character and say you are a liar, that you are a charlatan, you don't really believe these things that you're saying, you're just pretending to, you're making it up to deceive, well, then that's a very serious moral aspersion upon a person's character.
Especially in the context of your field.
Yes, and as a Christian as well.
As a Christian and as a colleague, as somebody who's accomplished in the field as well. Sometimes it seems, and I don't know how you responded emotionally to this, Bill. It sounds like it was really, really difficult for you. But sometimes I'm sitting here listening to what was said regarding you, and I want to laugh almost because it's so bizarre, not only in light of your public persona, which is well known as being one of grace and geniality and dealing with the issues, but also from what I know from you personally, and we've known each other 20 years since I started the program over at Talbot. Yours was the only C I ever got.
Oh, don't talk about that, Greg.
But I benefited immensely from your course on God and time. So we go way back, and I've had a lot of opportunity to meet you and be with you and Jan in more personal environments. Yes. And it's just so far from the truth what was said that it's just laughable. Okay, I'm hoping that in many cases people who are familiar with your work and your public persona, and the internet is filled with videos of your debates, etc., that they will, even folks on the other side, will realize how badly you were treated in that environment, and at least would be sympathetic to you for the bad treatment you received. Did you find that coming from the other side, a sense of sympathy?
Not very much. In Australia, Krauss has the status of a rock star, and they came out that night to cheer for him, and the audience was very secular, and this was like red meat to the audience. Okay. They ate it up.
That's the groupies there that are out to see him. But just in the broader community, as people were familiar with what took place because they see the videos on the internet and stuff, was there any, and maybe there wasn't, but was there, one would expect possibly a backlash from the number of what might be called friendly atheists that are out there?
Yeah, I didn't see a whole lot of that. But then, as I say, Greg, I tend to be somewhat blissfully ignorant of this. I, on Facebook, received a number of comments of this nature from Christians, but not too many from unbelievers. My hope for what these dialogues will do, as now some 250,000 people have watched the videos on YouTube already, is that people will look at these and say, oh, that charlatan Craig, let's go look at some of his other debates and see him get killed. What a idiot he is. And then look at them, and all of a sudden, by having such a low expectation, will suddenly be startled to saying, well, wait a minute, this guy doesn't seem to be the charlatan and the idiot that I always thought. And I have gotten emails like that where people have, say, looked at the debate with Christopher Hitchens, expecting to see Hitchens make mincemeat out of me, and then are quite shocked to come away with a different impression. And this begins to open them up then to the truth of the gospel.
Yeah, I've heard a number of people comment that as atheists, they were themselves completely unaware of any case that could be made for theism in general or Christianity in particular, and were stunned into silence, at least momentarily, when they began to hear thoughtful Christian people like yourself make a case for the existence of God and the reliability of the New Testament documents and the life of Christ and the resurrection and things like that. Not necessarily being convinced out of the gate, but stopped in their tracks in the sense that I never knew there even could be this kind of dialogue, or there were people like Dr. Craig and his colleagues that can make a case like this.
Yes, exactly. And I get emails like that all the time, and we're seeing people come to Christ as a result. They are not merely suddenly more open to it, but some of them then are following the evidence through and making commitments, and that's very, very exciting.
My guest today, Dr. William Lane Craig, author of Reasonable Faith, The Christian Truth and Apologetics, et al. If you want to remember one title, remember that. We have a new book we'll be talking about a little bit titled A Reasonable Response, published by Moody Press, I believe. Is that right? Yeah, Moody has published it. Also want to showcase Dr. Craig's work on his website, reasonablefaith.org. And they can sign up for your newsletter there, right?
Right, yes. We put out a monthly newsletter.
There is nothing like this newsletter. I mean, this is like the travels of the Apostle Paul. You know, you put so much work into this, though, to make it readable and fun for the reader. I look forward to those things. Okay. I don't toss them. I read them all the way through. And then you also will sometimes attach letters from skeptics who've responded to you or maybe even become Christians in light of the work that you've done.
Right. I mentioned the letters and the testimonials that we receive. We've started to append one of these to our monthly newsletter because these letters are so encouraging and even heartwarming as you see people coming to faith or growing in their faith or becoming more effective in defending their faith. So we've begun to share these testimonials with others by attaching one to the monthly newsletter.
So for the person who says that you can never argue anybody into the kingdom, there is a sense in which this certainly is not true, taken at face value.
A few years ago at a Apologetics conference, J.P. Moreland addressed this. And he says what he says now to people is, oh, yeah, you can. I've done it. And I thought, well, that's right. Yeah. It can be done. We do it. And so why should we quit apologizing? Just say, well, actually, yes, you can argue someone into the kingdom of God.
Of course, we don't mean, and this is what sometimes people are thinking about, that a mere argument apart from the work of the Holy Spirit is going to change a rebellious heart. But God certainly chooses to use arguments. He did in the New Testament times with Jesus, with the apostles, and modern day as well. And my guest, Dr. William Lane Craig, is a good example of that happening. This is Stand to Reason. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with more.
Would you like brief, easily digestible answers to some of the challenges you face as a Christian ambassador? Well, that's why we created our Ambassador's Guide series of booklets. Each volume in this series is designed to equip you with the practical tools you need to understand a topic or area of concern confronting Christians today. With these booklets, you'll receive concise and approachable guides to various philosophies like pluralism and postmodernism, world religions such as Islam and Mormonism, even strategies on how to answer the challenges of the new atheists. To order a booklet from the Ambassador's Guide series, visit our online store at str.org or call 800-2REASON.
You can find STR on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and Pinterest. Interact with STR staff, post comments, get involved with other like-minded Christians. Want to know what is going on with STR? Speaking events, new podcasts, resources, and articles? Follow STR online. You can find all of our social media connections at str.org.
Don't forget, Stand to Reason's live broadcast is Tuesdays 4 to 7 p.m. on the web. That's Pacific time, by the way. So go to str.org to listen live or use your STR app to stream it live. You can also give me a piece of your mind by calling at that time, Tuesdays 4 to 7 p.m. Pacific time. Here's the number, 855-243-9975. And, of course, you can listen on the radio, like always, on Sundays, 2 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. But for the live broadcast, tune in online Tuesdays, 4 to 7 p.m. Pacific time by going to str.org. Greg Koukl here on Stand to Reason. My guest, Dr. William Lane Craig. We don't get to talk too often, Bill, and you reminded me, and it's hard to believe it's been that long, but the last time we talked was in a cafe in Budapest.
Right.
Just kind of catching up again. We were both at the European Leadership Forum teaching, and you did a wonderful class on debating, which I took copious notes. But it's kind of the insider's class because you don't want everybody to know your tricks. But Bill, of course, is a consummate debater. You actually have a history of debating that goes back to high school or college?
Yes,
is that
when
right?
I was a freshman in high school, I joined the high school debate team and participated then in 8 years of high school and intercollegiate debate activities. And for me at that time, it was just a sport. It was a way I could represent our school. Since I didn't have any athletic abilities, I could compete for our school in academic debate. I never dreamt it would be a ministry someday. And I thought when I graduated from Wheaton that I had done my last debate. But after returning from Europe and finishing my doctoral work, I suddenly began getting invitation from these campus groups in Canada to participate in debates on the existence of God or the resurrection of Jesus. And I found that whereas, say, maybe a few score might come out and hear me give a talk, hundreds and even thousands would come out to hear a debate. And so it just became clear to me that this was the forum for evangelism on the university campus if you want to draw a crowd of unbelievers to come out to hear.
Now, I've done a handful of debates, maybe 10 or 12 debates personally. I think we both debated John Baker over at Calgary, but I debated him many years after you did, so I don't think he was in his prime when we got around to our debate. But he was defending moral non-realism. He's a relativist, and that I think is a very, very difficult thing to defend. Hard to get anybody to debate on that side anymore because I think it's hard to defend. But in any event. Now I got myself off on a rabbit trail there with Calgary, and I forgot the. I know what I was going to say. Is that doing debates myself? I think there's a liability to debates, and maybe you could speak about this. I know you're aware of this because you've mentioned it before, but it'll be good for our listeners to hear. My concern is, on the one hand, you have people that are oftentimes fairly galvanized and entrenched in their views, and so there's a lot of folks that aren't going to move one way or another no matter what you say. Secondly, there's a chance to do good if you're good, but you can also take a fall even if you have the right point of view.
Yes,
because so much depends on the rhetorical skill that you, as a debater, you have to take that into consideration when you face an opponent, so you're not bested by technique instead of by ideas. Can you speak to that?
Well, that's absolutely right, and that's one of the things that's different about audience debating compared to academic debating. When I debated in high school and college, we typically debated in an empty classroom with one judge seated at the back of the room, and that judge would then score the debate. But with audience debating, you have to take into account the demeanor, the emotions of the audience, how you carry yourself and present yourself, and all of these intangibles enter into the equation, not just the arguments. And so that does make it a lot more volatile situation. It's not enough just to be right, as you say. You've got to be able to present and defend your ideas in a winsome way.
What do you think about the capability of audiences to follow a line of reasoning? Because it's dependent that you have an audience that can do that in some measure for you to have a successful debate that depends on a line of reasoning.
I think the successful debater, Greg, understands that the audience's ability to follow a line of reasoning is limited, and they're not taking notes. And so one of the things he needs to do is to repeat for them over and over again what are his main contentions and then what are his supporting arguments for those, and just constantly rehearse those in the mind of the audience right through every speech to the end, so as to help the audience keep track of the central issues and not be diverted off chasing some red herring or rabbit trail.
This we call it stand to reason, narrating the argument. That is, you are sometimes debating proper, and other times you're, in a sense, stepping aside and telling the audience what just took place. That is, I made these points, which my opponent never answered, but brought up issues that were irrelevant to the points. Therefore, my points still stand. I mean, it's a way of kind of telling them the way they're supposed to be thinking about it.
Yeah, I hear you. You're giving a kind of meta narrative of what's happening in that event. And you need to do that because the audience doesn't know that itself.
You have a new book out. It's called A Reasonable Response, but I hesitate to call it new in one sense because when I started paging through it, I realized what's been going on.
Yeah.
Now, for years, you have been responding to questions on your website. I think it's the weekly question or something like that.
Yes, question of the week at reasonablefaith.org.
Reasonablefaith.org. And let me just keep underscoring that website, reasonablefaith.org. I go to Reasonable Faith. I'm your talk show host. I'm your mentor for many of you, but I go there because I learned there. And this is Dr. Craig is the kind of mentor for me that helps me keep my sails trimmed, so to speak. Philosophically speaking, I get good information. I learn good thinking habits just by listening, Bill, to how you handle the opposition and how you handle the arguments, and also the clarity with which you speak.
Thank you.
So you have been in the habit of doing this for quite a while, and it seems to me, my suspicion is that this is your source material for this book.
Well, not exactly. What this is a compilation of those questions of the week.
Okay.
Is really. Joe Gora, my teaching assistant, took about 60 of these 300 and some questions, and he lumped them together thematically, like questions on the absurdity of and meaning of life, questions on the existence of God, questions on the beginning of the universe, questions on Jesus and being his disciple.
Objective morality, the Trinity, atheism and the meaning of life, God and time, origins of the universe, hell and the afterlife. Here, I'm looking at the contents right now.
Right, and by lumping these together thematically, he created a very nice overview of my answers to tough questions in these different areas. These are real questions from real people that have actually come into the site, and then gives us an idea of how we can respond to these hard questions.
It seems to me that this Q&A format, since you're responding to, as you pointed out, actual questions, challenges from real people, kind of gives the reader a sense of involvement in the a kind of a sense of being there as you're addressing these issues, because these are not just concocted concepts, but these are real questions that very intelligent, in many cases, very learned people who are fairly sophisticated in philosophy have brought to the table.
Yes,
for you
and
to
some
answer.
very agonizing questions too, Greg. People who write in who are struggling with horrible doubt and are really crying out for help. Some of them are very deeply personal. Others are less sophisticated. Others are much more sophisticated, as you say. We've left in all of the original spelling errors and grammatical mistakes. So you do get a sense of authenticity here, that you are really looking in on a genuine dialogue between a couple of people about these things.
Well, this is something that I appreciate about your podcast, Bill. I podcast, just to let my audience know, I podcast very little. There are only 2 podcasts that I listen to with any regularity, and Bill's is one of them. Partly because in your podcast you're with your kind of sidekick Kevin there, at Reasonable Faith, and he's the host, kind of moving the thing forward, and sometimes reading questions which you respond to, and then you interact with Kevin on. Sometimes you're reporting on your world travels and things that have happened. I think there were 3 or 4 shows, just half-hour shows, dedicated to the Lawrence Krauss discussions there in Australia. But what I like about it for myself, Bill, is that as a philosopher, you're making careful distinctions, and sometimes these challenges and these questions that come up, they trade on refined distinctions. Now, wait a minute, I think you're asking the wrong question. Like the person I listened to the podcast 2 nights ago, the person who said, if it turns out Islam is true, would you follow the God of Islam and his morality? And you said, the question that you asked it is not the right question, and maybe you can develop this a moment. You said, would I? And that's really a question about my psychology. The real question is, should I, if he's the true God? And see, that what might be considered a modest distinction, you clarified for the listener, and you could see how important that distinction was. These are the kinds of things that help me a lot as a Christian thinker. Take a moment and cash that particular distinction out. For
Sometimes people will say, what good is philosophy? And I think one of the great benefits of philosophy is drawing careful conceptual distinctions, such as you just explained. Where this also comes up very often is in the question, what would make you lose your faith, or what would make you abandon your faith? And again, that is the wrong question. The question, what would make me lose my faith, is a question about my personal psychology. And I don't know what would make me lose my faith. Maybe my wife getting run over by a car or getting leukemia. What would do it? The question is, what should make me lose my faith? And that will then deal with, well, what is the objective evidence?
In other words, what would be a legitimate defeater regardless of my psychological
personal
response
psychology,
for or against?
Right. In fact, it would be presumptuous for a person to say nothing would make me lose my faith, because that's what St. Peter said. I'll never deny you, Lord. And look what happened to him. So we shouldn't even be talking about that question. That's presumptuous. Mm-hmm. Another conceptual distinction that came up recently that I think is very important is the difference between absolute values and objective values. Mm-hmm. And I'm arguing that if there is no God, then there are no objective moral values. Mm-hmm. But that's not the same as saying absolute moral values, which would be values that hold in every circumstance, regardless of the situation.
No exceptions.
Exactly, no exceptions.
I'm glad you mentioned this, because this has been a tremendous frustration for me in dealing with the issue of morality. I wrote the book on relativism. I think the moral argument is one of the best arguments for the existence of God, because the problem of evil proves that moral relativism is false, simply put. And I mean proves to the rank and file, because they so easily offer the problem of evil as an objection, and they are not talking about an internal contradiction usually inside of Christianity. They're talking about the actual existential problem, which they acknowledge, which there can't be a problem of evil if there is no objective morality. So I'm fourscore behind that argument. I think it's a fabulous argument. However, when Christians try to make their case about objective morality, they use the term absolute instead, and I think it creates confusion. Because then they define absolute as a moral rule that holds for all people, for all times and all places, and there seems to be almost no moral rule that can satisfy that particular definition.
One of the few things that would be absolute in that sense would be, you shall love the Lord your God with all your strength and heart and mind. That would seem to be something that has no exceptions. But, for example, not killing another person, in some situations that's justified. If there's a terrorist attack, a policeman has the moral duty, I would say, perhaps to kill someone.
Use lethal force, right. So these are examples of the kind of thing you can expect if you go to reasonablefaith.org, if you get some of Dr. Craig's books, if you get the newsletter is more newsy, of course, but you do recount the debates in a very interesting way, and you also have like second edition of these letters, right? For more information, more detail on the debate, go to this link. So people can really expand their experience of keeping up to date with what the Lord's been doing through you. But I generally, when I recommend a general book on apologetics, I suggest Reasonable Faith for people who want something a little more dense and a little more sophisticated. You're writing on that level. However, you also have children's books, for goodness sake. I have one right. I mean, William Lane Craig's What is God Like? Featuring Brown Bear and Red Goose. Here it is in front of me. I actually bought like 5 or 6 of these for my 9- and 6-year-old now daughters. We have not started to go through them yet, but what happened is at first I thought, this is repackaging of the other stuff. And then I saw them on a table somewhere, and I started reading them, and I thought, this is really accessible.
Yeah.
So for your high school students, there are no, this is a joke. For your children, sometimes you think, fun with Dick and Jane for your senior in high school. It's unfortunate things are dumbed down so much.
I do think parents who read these books to their children wind up learning a lot about the attributes of God that they might not think that they need to learn.
Well, you look at if a 7-year-old could understand it, then even a 20-year-old could understand it or older. And so you throw the ball so people could catch it. This is one. What is God like? One of a series. I wonder if it has the totals in the back, all the names. I don't see
in the very back, there's a page that has the pictures of the different covers.
Oh, yeah. Okay. God is spirit. God is everywhere. God is self-sufficient. God is forever. So we have all these details of God's character and nature that can be explained to children. You also have a book here, and I have never seen this. And I think now the title is The Defense Never Rests, so it sounds vaguely familiar to me, but I didn't realize that this is a workbook.
Right.
It's a lesson. Could you describe it for our listeners?
This is a workbook that was developed by an Australian Christian Sunday school teacher named Joseph Tang. And Joseph sent me these worksheets and said, I teach a class of 8 and 10-year-old children, and I'm teaching them your material using these fill-in-the-blank sheets. And he would give them these Xerox sheets with blanks, and then as he taught the lesson, the children would fill in the blanks. And Greg, he was teaching them the Kalam cosmological argument. He was teaching them the ontological argument.
I don't even go there because
it was about possible worlds. And in a possible world, I'm a princess. And in another possible world, I am a farmer or something. Yeah. And then God is the greatest possible being and so forth. And I said to Joseph, did these kids get this? And he sent me children's letters, their reactions to this, about how they understood it. And it was just, again, thrilling. These little 8 and 9-year-old kids get this stuff.
Oh, my gosh.
Which is testimony to Joseph's skill as a teacher, I think. But I said, Joseph, we got to publish these worksheets. And so I refined them, we revised them, and now have published this in the form of a workbook, and there's a teacher's edition that goes with it that has all the answers. So you're not left
just in case you can't fill it in yourself.
Right, because it isn't something that you fill in the blank by trying to guess the answer.
Right.
These are more like structured notes where, as the teacher teaches the material, the children fill in the blanks.
This workbook then is not self-directed. It requires some kind of oversight from a teacher, but it's not that hard with the manual.
That is exactly right. It's not self-directed. If I sat down and had to fill in these blanks, I would be puzzled at some of them as to know what word to put in the blank.
Yeah.
But we have a teacher's edition where the teacher can teach the class these arguments and evidences, and then as you go through the lesson, the child fills in the blank and completes the workbook.
Well, I want my daughters to learn these things, especially since my youngest, when she was 4, she asked me, can God do everything?
We have a booklet on that.
Well, and I said yes, and then she said, well, then can God poop?
Oh, gosh.
And so there she had me then. You know. Of course, I could have, well, anyway, true story, but don't go there, right. Kids say the darndest things. My guest right now, Dr. William Lane Craig, will be back after a break with more conversation with him on Stand to Reason.
At Stand to Reason, we depend on the support of donors to carry on our mission to equip Christian ambassadors, and your non-cash donation items can help. You can transform your old cars, cell phones, or other items into ministry impact by donating them to Stand to Reason. Think of it. Because of your donation, Christians just like you will be able to effectively share their faith and change the lives of others forever. To make non-cash donations of all kinds to Stand to Reason, call iDonate at 877-897-4273 or go to idonate.com and visit STR's page. They'll take care of everything for you and Stand to Reason. Just call them at 877-897-4273 or visit idonate.com. Thank you very much for making Stand to Reason's work possible.
The most practical thing you can understand in order to answer the challenges of skeptics and critics is the Bible. It's God's revelation that we represent to others. You can get a better grasp of God's history of redemption in Greg Koukl's video series, The Bible Fast Forward. The Bible Fast Forward gives a practical, historical overview of the Old Testament, emphasizing the unfolding plan of salvation as God reveals it through his covenants with the nation of Israel and the fulfillment of those covenants in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. You'll gain an understanding of how the central topical elements of the Christian story of reality play out historically from the fall to the cross. I'm convinced you'll gain a clearer understanding of the important themes of the Bible when you study the Bible Fast Forward. You can order this DVD curriculum that includes a comprehensive study guide by visiting STR's store online at str.org. Give us a call at 800-2-REASON or visit str.org to order the Bible Fast Forward.
Final segment here on Stand to Reason for this hour at least. My guest, Dr. William Lane Craig, his books, many of them. Reasonable Faith is the one most popular, I guess, because it covers so much ground. The one we're talking about here a little bit is A Reasonable Response, available through Moody Press. And then we've talked a little bit, Bill, about your books training young people, even children. And that's really great. Two things just quickly to mention. One of them is I just realized on my own schedule that tomorrow night I'm actually doing a webcast with your Dallas Reasonable Faith chapter.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, you have chapters at many different places. I know nationally. I don't know if you have international chapters or not.
We have about 60 total local chapters around the United States and other countries.
That's an explosion when I consider that this is, the number of years that this whole enterprise has been in play, the chapters. And so I helped open up the Reasonable Faith chapter in Dallas. I got flown out there and did the talk for the opening of that chapter.
And that is our flagship local chapter. Yeah. They are incorporated as a nonprofit corporation themselves so that they can put on events, raise support. It's a very fine group of people.
Well, I love doing work with them and doing anything I can to contribute to what you're about, Bill. Also, we're going to be doing something together in the Philippines, I understand, in August.
Right.
I'm really excited about that possibility. You probably know more about it than I do. I just know it's on the schedule. So,
right. Well, Reasonable Faith is organizing it. Mm-hmm. The idea is to put on what we call an on-guard conference, where we will train people in the use of the arguments in my book, On Guard. Mm-hmm. Cosmological argument, fine-tuning argument, moral argument, and then evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, and responding to objections like the problem of evil. So the goal of this conference is not just to have an inspiring time where you're entertained and you hear different speakers on different topics. This conference is very intentionally geared and structured to be an equipping conference to train Filipino Christians to be able to defend and articulate their faith effectively. And I think with what God is doing in the Philippines and the way Filipino Christians go out into all the world to, for example, Muslim countries where they are house servants and maids and so forth. This has just great potential for making an impact for the kingdom.
Well, I was surprised to get the invitation, thrilled to participate, so I'm looking forward to that. It'll be in early August. It's not like anybody I'm talking to can be invited to that. Unless you're in the Philippines, I'm sure we got listeners there, but that's going to be coming up in August. And Abdu Murray is going to be there, Frank Turek, so the four of us will be involved in the training. Two other questions here with the remaining minutes we have. Are you a bit surprised at the kind of renaissance in Christian apologetics that we've experienced in the last 20 years?
I guess I'm not surprised, Greg, because it was preceded by a similar renaissance in Christian philosophy. Since the late 1960s, there has been a renaissance going on in the field of Anglo-American philosophy where Christian philosophers have been coming out of the closet and defending the truth of the Christian world and life view in the professional societies, the top academic journals, and the top presses with sophisticated arguments. And the face of philosophy has been transformed as a result. And I think it was just a matter of time for this began to trickle down into popular culture through people who use the arguments of these philosophers on a popular level to defend the gospel. So this Renaissance in Christian apologetics is, I think, in large measure the fruit of what's happened in Christian philosophy.
And what J.P. Moreland has done with his program there at Biola, Talbot rather, the MA Phil program that Melinda and I and Brett have now all graduated from here, and this is our first contact there, and you're, of course, on the faculty for that. That was an intentional effort to have an impact at the highest levels, but it's had its obviously, it's trickle-down effect through Stand to Reason and others like us.
Just think of the impact of that Talbot program on Stand to Reason, and then through you to the millions of people impacted by Stand to Reason.
Well, there's something else that's going on, too, at the same time, and it's another reason to be excited, and maybe you can say something about this. And I listened, I was with Gary Habermas last week in New Orleans, and Gary was talking about how the foundations of naturalism are actually really being shaken badly for a number of different reasons. He gave 10 different reasons, but one of them was the indication, even among professional philosophers, of second thoughts or even conversion away from naturalism to some form of theistic thinking. And he mentioned two people. One was Anthony Flew, who went from atheism to some kind of deism before he died, I think a year or two ago. He wrote the book, There Is a God. And then the more recent Mind and Cosmos by Thomas Nagel, who is still an atheist as far as I know, but the subtitle is Why the Materialist Neo-Darwinian Conception of Nature is Almost Certainly False. And he has taken a lot of heat for this book, though it's magnificently written, and he's on point with so many critiquing the weaknesses of naturalism. What's going on here, Bill?
Well, it does seem to me that, in particular, in the philosophy of mind, that materialism is really under attack, and that's what Nagel is doing. He's not so much arguing for God as that, in addition to just matter and motion, mind seems to be an important part of the cosmos, and in particular, important part of our makeup, that we are embodied minds, and you can't fully explain human beings without taking into account the mind or the self.
Right.
And the absurdities to which the denial of mind leads was very evident in my debate last February with Alex Rosenberg, where because he denies that there is mind, he thinks there is no such thing as intentionality. We never think about anything. Therefore, there is no meaning. No, even the sentences in his own book, he said, have no meaning. Therefore, there is no truth. So his own view isn't true.
Right.
And therefore, there are no selves, so he doesn't exist.
Pardon me for laughing, but it's so wildly self-defeating. It seems like the only appropriate response. I think of Daniel Dennett here, who talks about consciousness being an illusion, which stumped a couple of friends of mine when they asked me about it. How do you deal with that? I said, what is an illusion? Illusion is a misperception of the mind. So if the mind itself is an illusion, then what is having the illusion of the mind?
And here's another thought about illusion, Greg. Any illusion is an intentional state. It's an illusion of something. So you can't say intentionality is an illusion, because an illusion is an intentional state. Yeah. More of this self-defeat that you mentioned.
Yeah, just a word to bring our listeners up to speed. When Dr. Craig is talking about intentionality, he's talking about the ofness or aboutness of something. So my thoughts right now are about our interview. No physical thing, a rock, a phone, no physical thing is about anything else. There is no intentionality, which identifies a unique characteristic of consciousness that is not characteristic of material things, and therefore consciousness must not be material, is the kind of thinking. And the only way to get around that is to deny intentionality, or to deny that any conscious state is about anything else. which is wildly self-refuting and kind of laughable when you think about it. So do you now I know that Thomas Nagel is not he's not going to any form of theism at this point, and he mentions that. He's straight up front. I think he was one of the people who said, I don't want there to be a God in other writings. But at least he's willing to admit now that the naturalist characterization of the world is not adequate to explain the world as we know it. So where is he going to go?
Well, we don't know, of course, where he will go, but I think that what you do when you let mind in, as Richard Lewontin has said, once you give up materialism and you let the supernaturalist foot in the door, then why can't there be a transcendent mind, God, beyond the cosmos, who is the creator and designer of the universe? So when you let minds into the world, naturalism it begins to totter.
And it strikes me to disprove naturalism, that is the metaphysical view that only the natural, material, physical world exists, governed by natural law. Materialism, naturalism, kind of synonymous at this point. All you have to do is show one non-natural, non-material thing or quality, one, and that's enough to falsify the entire worldview.
Exactly, and I think intentionality for me is the most persuasive example of such a quality.
Because everyone has access to it.
We all think about things.
Yeah. It's sometimes, to show something exists, so you point at it. That's one way. And sometimes the things we point at are immaterial things. We point at them by the way we describe them, but we know they're real and they're part of our common experience. So anyway, the time has been way too short, Bill. It's just flown by. I had a tremendous pleasure talking with you today, and I know my listeners did as well. Keep up the fine work.
Well, thank you, Greg. I've tremendously enjoyed our conversation. I was so delighted when I received the invitation to be on the program. I love working with Stand to Reason. I appreciate and have benefited from your ministry, and always glad to partner with you.
Thank you. Very kind of you. We'll look forward to our next shot together in the Philippines. This time maybe we'll have a lunch at some cafe in Manila next time we chat. I don't know. Dr. William Lane Craig, my guest, my colleague, go to reasonablefaith.org, and you can sign up for his newsletter. You can check out his question of the week, and if you want to have more examples of that kind of interaction, his most recent book is A Reasonable Response, Answers to Tough Questions on God, Christianity, and the Bible. It's co-authored by Joseph Gura, who, by the way, has fabulous little call-out insights on just about every page where what Joseph does is kind of narrate Bill's argument a little bit for your encouragement and your edification. So thanks so much for the time that you spent with me this hour. Again, be sure to sign up for Bill Craig's, not only his newsletter at reasonablefaith.org, but also check out his podcast. It will be I think, is it 20 minutes a week? Is that how often that you do it now?
We have 2 podcasts every week.
Oh, 2?
2 podcasts weekly, yes.
I see. Okay, well, there you can get it and benefit the way I have benefited. That's it for the hour we have here, friends. Stay with us. I'll be taking your calls in the next hour. I'm Greg Koukl for Stand to Reason.